This Film is Lit, the podcast where we finally settle the score on one simple question. Is the book really better than the movie? I'm Brian, and I have a film degree, so I watch the movie, but don't read the book.
And I'm Katie. I have an English degree, so I do things the right way and read the book before we watch the movie.
So prepare to be wowed by our expertise and charm as we dissect all of your favorite film adaptations and decide if the silver screen or the written word did it better. So turn it up, settle in, and get ready for spoilers, because this film is lit. This monster was real. Real as they come. As real as the cuffs, as the dog, as real as the eclipse. It's Gerald's game, and this film is lit. Hello and welcome back to This Film is Lit, the podcast where we talk about movies that are based on books. We don't have every segment because we don't have a whatchamacallit, do we?
We don't have a Guess Who.
We don't have that, but we do have every other segment, including lots to dive into. So before we get to everything else, I wanted to give a brief content warning. We will be discussing, obviously, if you're listening to this episode, you probably have read the book or watched the movie. This book/movie are about child sexual assault, is like a big recurring or important element of the story. So if that, is something you don't want to hear us discuss, we won't get into any nitty-gritty details necessarily, but it is going to be discussed throughout the episode. So just wanted to give that warning at the beginning. Now, if you have not read or watched Gerald's Game and need a little bit of a primer, we're going to give you the summary of the film in Let Me Sum Up. This is a pretty long and detailed summary. If you want to skip it, you can jump to 708.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
This summary is sourced from Wikipedia, and it is just for the film. Jesse and Gerald Burlingame arrive at an isolated lake house in Fairhope, Alabama for a romantic getaway. They come across a stray dog on the drive over. Jesse wants to help it, but Gerald objects. While Gerald takes Viagra, Jesse cuts up a raw steak from the refrigerator and calls out for the dog to eat it. Gerald sees this and chastises her, for the steak was expensive Kobe beef, but decides to allow her to leave the steak out. They enter the house and Gerald leaves the door open behind them. Inside, she changes into a new slip and Gerald restrains her with a set of handcuffs locked to the bedposts. He begins to enact a stranger rape fantasy. She half-heartedly plays along but becomes uncomfortable, telling him to stop and uncuff her. After a heated argument in which he accuses her of not trying to rekindle their relationship, Gerald dies of a heart attack, falling on top of Jesse and leaving her trapped in the handcuffs. A few hours pass. The dog enters through the open door of the house, and Jesse tries to scare it away, but it bites a chunk out of Gerald's arm and eats it. Gerald stands up and begins talking. When Jesse notices his body remains on the floor, she realizes that she is hallucinating. He taunts her about the truths of their strained marriage and his erectile dysfunction. He informs her that she is beginning to suffer from dehydration and fatigue. And Jesse hallucinates a more self-assured version of herself who explains things about her and Gerald that she never had the courage to acknowledge. The two hallucinations trigger her to remember the glass of water that Gerald had left on the shelf above the bed, which she is able to reach, but she cannot drink it, so she rolls the shopping tag that she had torn from her slip into a drinking straw to reach the water. Jesse falls asleep. The dog appears to be startled by footsteps in the house and runs out of the house barking. Jesse wakes up in the dark and sees a deformed, obscured figure who reveals a bag of bones and trinkets. She refuses to believe the figure is real, but Gerald says the figure is Death waiting to take her, pointing out that he must have been real because the dog ran out of the house. Gerald begins to call Jesse Mouse, which triggers a memory of her father Tom, who affectionately referred to her as Mouse. When she was 12, her family went on vacation to see a solar eclipse from a boat. Jesse was scared of going on the water, so she chose to stay back to her mother's frustration, and Tom agreed to watch her while the rest of the family went on the boat. During the eclipse, Tom asked Jesse to sit on his lap, supposedly reminiscing about Jesse's childhood, but began masturbating while Jesse was on his lap watching the eclipse. Tom manipulates Jesse afterwards to cover up the abuse, pretending he intended to tell their mother what happened, but subtly implying that her mother would blame Jesse for it. Near the end of their conversation, he admitted that he did a shameful thing but could not look at her when he says this. Gerald points out that Jesse never told him about this. Gerald and the hallucination Jesse taunt her, saying that she never recovered from the assault and that she married a man just like her father. During her childhood memory, Jessie hallucinates a deformed man licking her foot. She comes to and realizes it was the dog licking her foot and kicks it away. Gerald points out that it is only a matter of time before the dog stops eating his dead body and goes for her. Gerald calls the deformed man the man made of moonlight and points out a bloody footprint on the floor, making Jesse realize that the figure may have been real. Gerald warns the deformed man will be back after dark and indicates that she must find a way to escape before he returns. Jessie speaks to her child persona, who asks her to remember what happened afterwards. She recalls eating dinner with her family and gripping a water glass so tight that it shattered and cut her hand in the process after her mother asked her how her time with Tom was while everyone was on the boat. Her mother is shocked and seems to suspect that something happened, but still does nothing, and Tom takes her aside to clean up her wound. In present day, Jessie hallucinates Tom and her younger self tending to the wound in the sink nearby the bed, and she realizes that the only way to escape is to break the water glass, cut her wrist, and use the blood as lubricant to free one of her hands from the cuff. That's kind of what happens. She smashes the water glass, cuts her wrist, and peels back the skin. Yeah, that is what happens, allowing her bloody hand to slip through the cuff. She first reaches for her phone, only to see that the battery is dead. She then reaches the keys for the handcuffs and unlocks her other hand. She bandages her wrist with sanitary pads, but passes out from blood loss and fatigue. When she wakes, the man made of moonlight is at the end of the hallway. Delirious, she removes her wedding ring and gives it to him for his trinket bag before leaving. She makes it to her car and drives away, but hallucinates the deformed man again, who whispers mouse into her ear, and she crashes into a tree. People from a nearby house emerge to help. 6 months later, Jessie is writing a letter to her 12-year-old self. She describes how she had pretended to have amnesia over the whole ordeal of being trapped to avoid painful questions. She used some of Gerald's life insurance to start a foundation for victims of sexual abuse, but each night the man made of moonlight still appears before her as she falls asleep. She is disturbed by the fact that despite the police thoroughly searching the house, they were never able to find her wedding ring. She learns from the news that the man made of moonlight was in fact a serial killer and grave robber with acromegaly called Raymond Andrew Joubert, who assaults and mutilates men, explaining why he did not harm Jessie in the house and why Gerald's ears were missing. Jessie arrives at court as Joubert is being arraigned. He breaks free of his handcuffs and quotes what she said before leaving the house, mocking her and indicating that he was in fact there at the time. Seeing Gerald and her father in him, she tells him, "You're so much smaller than I remember," and leaves triumphantly. The end. All right, that was a very, like literally every single detail of what happens in the film, basically. So I'm gonna put in retrospect. I'm gonna put in if you want to skip ahead, I'll do that later when I'm editing because that was a long one.
It was almost in the right order.
It was pretty much. That was actually a pretty accurate one for the most part. It was just really, really detailed in a way that maybe it was not necessary, but that's fine. All right, I have a lot of questions. Let's get into those. Was that in the book?
Gaston, may I have my book, please?
How can you read this? There's no pictures.
Well, some people use their imagination.
So the film opens up. They're driving somewhere. Well, we see them packing for the first shot. We'll talk about that later. But then we're immediately they're driving somewhere. Jessie and Gerald are two main characters, and on their way, a dog is in the road, and they have to slam on their brakes and almost hit it. This kind of mangy-looking feral dog that is eating roadkill. This is a very quintessential horror movie open. It's also the way Get Out starts, I believe. Well, they actually hit a
I think
fox.
They hit a deer in that.
I thought it was a fox, but it could be. I don't remember. Yeah, hitting a dead animal on the road, driving somewhere is like a classic horror movie open, or almost hitting it, whatever. And so I wanted to know if this happened in the book.
No, it does not. The book cold opens with Gerald locking Jessie into the handcuffs. So we don't see them like driving to the house or getting ready or anything. She can hear the dog like barking somewhere outside, but we don't see it until later. I like both openings. I think both have their strengths and weaknesses. I don't really have a strong opinion on that change.
Yeah, I think the movie's fine. I think it helps a little bit. I don't think it would have. I don't know if it would have been as successful to just immediately open straight in on her like in bed. I think a little bit of lead into that helps, but anyways, it doesn't really matter. So when they get to the house, they're driving to a lake house that they own for the weekend to have like a romantic weekend together and to respice their love life, rekindle their love life. And when they get there, they hang out for a little bit, and then she changes because they're gonna have sex. And she changes into like this negligee, the slip, whatever they call it, a slip in the movie. I guess that's the word for it. I don't know, whatever. I don't know what the term is, but she's wearing this like lingerie dress looking thing. But as he's getting ready to come into the room, she quickly realizes that the tag is still on it because she just bought it. And so she pulls it off really quick and sets it on the mantle above they have like a bookcase, like a bookshelf above the bed. And she sets it on that. And I wanted to know if that detail came from the book, because I liked it as a detail of very quickly kind of giving us detail about it was a very, very show don't tell, giving us background about their relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. That is not from the book. In the book, she's just wearing underwear. So she doesn't have, obviously, they couldn't do that in the movie and like just have her boobs out the entire time.
Oh, well, they could have.
Well, they could have.
Yeah, there's no need
but
to, though.
There's no need
yeah,
to.
it doesn't really, yeah.
But I did also really enjoy that detail in the movie. It's still like the lingerie is still brand new, kind of subtly tells us a lot about their sex life.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I then immediately knew what the tag would end up being used for, which I really enjoyed as a book reader.
Oh, okay. Interesting. There's a line, I almost had a question about this, but I don't think I ended up deleting it, I think. But when he sees it, he has this line where he says, like, oh, I love this slip. And she says, oh, thanks. I'm glad I bought it or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, I got the vibe from that exchange that he was maybe like, I think maybe what we're supposed to get out of that exchange was that he didn't realize it was new. Maybe like when he says, maybe. I love this, the way he said, I love this slip, almost like he's trying to be like, oh, I love this slip. It's so sexy or whatever. She's like, you've never seen, because the I love this, it sounds more like he's pretending that like, oh yeah, this is my favorite piece of lingerie you own, when really she just bought it. Again, I don't know if that's how you're supposed to read it, but it's another little indication of kind of where their relationship is at.
Yeah.
So then they get down to it, and the whole purpose of why they're doing this, again, their relationship has been struggling, as we kind of see from the drive there and their interactions with each other. But then they go to have sex, and he has brought these handcuffs with him because he wants to try this kind of fun sex scenario, and he wants to handcuff her to the bed. But he pulls the handcuffs out, and they're real handcuffs, like legit actual handcuffs. And I wanted to know if that was the same detail in the book, because I was like, bro, you do not use real handcuffs.
Don't use real handcuffs for sex.
Particularly if there's not like other people there that can help undo them for like this exact reason.
Yeah. Yes, they are real handcuffs. In the book, we learn that he got them from a cop that he knows from work, because he's like a lawyer.
Yeah, I think we assume he's a lawyer in the movie. We only hear a little. They never say. Well, I think they do maybe at the end of the movie potentially, but in the whole like in the very end like monologue she gives. But up until that point, we hear his dialogue, and I was like, he's a lawyer. Like when he's on the phone that one time, and he's like, "Oh, we can't move forward unless they sign the non-compete." I was like, "Oh yeah, he's an asshole lawyer."
Yeah. And we learn later on in the book that they are male cuffs.
Oh.
Like he calls them like some string of numbers or something.
Like they have different ones for that makes sense.
And he was disappointed by that.
Sizes,
probably, because the male cuffs don't close as tightly as the female cuffs do. But it was
apparently still enough.
It was a good thing that they had the male cuffs.
That's true, actually. Yeah, in retrospect, it might have been so the handcuffs her to the bed, and the way he does it, if you haven't seen the movie, is they have like a 4-poster. Well, I guess I don't think it has posters on the end.
Yeah, I think it's
a two-poster bed,
which
I guess is a thing. But it's got these big like poles, like banisters up by the headboard on each end, and he puts one end. He has 2 pairs of handcuffs, and he puts one end around each of her wrists, and then the other end of each of the handcuffs like around these wooden banisters. And it's important anyway. So, and that's how he handcuffs her to the bed. And then they start going at it, and he's doing this like kind of role play scenario where he's pretending like he's not her husband, and like he's this stranger who's come in to take advantage of her. And she like almost immediately starts having like a panic attack, and like clearly is not into. Well, she's clearly not into it like pretty immediately, and then very shortly thereafter, within like a minute, is like full on having like a panic attack. And I was like, oh, bro, did you not discuss any of it? Clearly didn't discuss any of this with her. And so I wanted to know if she reacted so quickly, like if she had such a negative reaction so quickly in the book. And then on that, I had a second question that you moved up here, which is that at one point she's like they start arguing after she starts kind of freaking out. And then she's like, uncuff me. And she says, just uncuff me and we can talk. And then he kind of just out of nowhere is like, what if I won't? But like they've already kind of broken the scene at this point. So I wanted to know if both of those elements came from the book.
Yeah. So the book is told in third person, but we're in Jesse's perspective for the majority of it. And she is already not into the idea of what they're doing at all. Like, I feel like in the movie she entertains it a little bit more than she does in the book even.
Oh yeah, I mean obviously I can't compare, but yeah, she seems very hesitant in the movie. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I guess she at least kind of plays along for a minute.
Yeah.
but
But in the book she's really irritated at the idea of having to like play along with this. She's not into it. She thinks it's stupid. And so she tells him she wants to stop, and he plays dumb and like acts like it's just part of the scene, even
Right.
though he can
Which
clearly tell
he
that
kind
like,
of he does in the
kinda
movie too. Yeah.
It's like subtly different between the book and the movie, which I'll get to. And that's what kicks off their argument. And he does say, "What if I won't?" to one of her requests to be like set loose. I wouldn't say that she has a panic attack in the book, not like she does in the movie. At one point he drools on her, and her brain immediately interprets that as his semen due to her like previous trauma.
Oh, okay.
And that like sends her into a fit of rage.
Okay.
I liked the movie's decision though to change this to having him call himself daddy, and that being like the thing that sets her off.
Yeah, that's like the big thing that
Yeah.
like really triggers her. But
Yeah.
yeah.
I thought that it felt more concretely related. Plus I thought that the drool semen thing would have been hard for a movie to explain
Oh,
in the moment.
that I agree with completely. I don't know if it's. I think the book's version would work totally fine in the book because again we get to be there, and like I think that seems like a very reasonable like trigger for her.
Yeah.
But I think trying to explain that in a movie would have been
Yeah.
damn near impossible. Whereas what the movie does and switching it to him saying daddy or calling himself daddy definitely becomes very clear very quickly like why this is an issue for her, or at least because at this point we don't know,
Right.
but like it you have an idea at least, like it's starting to set you down the path, whereas the drool semen thing would have been like, how do we even possibly explain this to an audience at all? Yeah. So and I don't even actually, I have this here, but it's not really even a question so much. I guess I can ask about the line. I think this was just a note I had that I wrote down and ended up in my questions. But at one point, as they're arguing, she's still handcuffed to the bed. Obviously, it's the whole premise of the movie. But he's like, they're arguing back and forth. And at one point, he stands up. He's like, "How did we go so wrong?" And I'm like, I don't know, man. Probably because you clearly never talked to your wife about like literally anything ever.
Yeah.
Like you guys have like the worst relationship I've ever seen based on the 5 minutes I've seen of your relationship. Like you guys don't talk about it. Like you just started doing like a rape role play scenario with her with zero warning and like
Zero discussion.
Yeah.
So that specific question, how did we go so wrong? I don't think ever happens in the book. But I did want to talk about the kind of first little bit of the movie, because I thought one of the most interesting changes that the movie made to this kind of like opening act is to sort of trick us into thinking that they might have like not that bad of a relationship.
Didn't trick me, but
See, and I was comparing it to the book, so it felt different to me.
okay.
Like I felt like there was tension, but I felt like things seemed like not that bad up until she wants to stop their sex game.
I guess it depends on what you mean by that bad. Yeah, I mean, clearly, like, once that happens, it triggers this whole thing, and then it spirals into a place where, like, oh, they're, like, really have, like, a horrible relationship. But even before that, I was, like, I don't know. Like, if their relationship after that moment, I'm like, well, that's a 10 out of 10 bad relationship. Before that, I was like, they're like a 7 out of 10 bad relationship. I don't know. Like, they're, like, her looks in the car as they're driving there. And I will admit, that mine was tempered by the fact that I kind of knew the premise of the movie, and like so I'm sure that like fed into that a little bit. Like if I had gone in completely blind, maybe I wouldn't have felt that way. But even still, I was like, pretty clearly terrible.
At any rate, comparing it to the book, paragraph 1, I was like, oh, you hate him, huh?
Oh,
you absolutely cannot stand this man. And then as soon as he started talking, I was like, oh, you hate her. Okay, that's what we're doing.
Right.
Whereas to me, it at least felt like I don't think the movie was trying to say like, oh, these two have a great relationship initially.
No, I'm not saying
But it did feel like a little more nuanced.
Right. It's definitely, you're unsure of like, are they just going through a fight right now?
Yeah.
Or is like their relationship just at a fundamental level does it not work?
It's
And it
the
becomes very
it's the
clear
second
that it's the
thing.
second thing very soon. But I guess, you could think, again, maybe I'm just so like, I was so keyed into like all the little, because I kind of knew that like it was about their relationship and stuff like that.
Mhm.
So, and among other things, but like I was very, so maybe I was just more keyed into the details of like her reactions to him saying things, and just that he seemed like the worst person from moment one.
Yeah.
That I was like, yeah, there's nothing worth saving here.
I also thought it was really interesting that the movie has Gerald like break character during their scene and then still refuse to let her out.
Which is what I was talking about
Yeah.
with that. Well, the question before this one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because in the book, he plays dumb the entire time. Like, he never, like, breaks character so that they can argue. He just acts like he thinks she's in character, even though he, like, clearly knows that she
Right.
isn't.
But like he's still,
And yeah.
interesting. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous. They're, like I said, their marriage is just awful. It's because
Yeah.
they clearly did not discuss any of this.
No, I feel like one of my first notes in the book was like, oh, so no safe word, huh?
Nothing.
No safe word, no safe bondage tools. Okay, cool.
Yep. No. Yeah, which makes sense again, because it's not. He's doing this kind of impulsively
Yeah.
because it's like a fantasy of his or whatever, but it's not, because their relationship is not one built on trust and communication. It is just like he just does this thing he wants to do, and oh boy, that went poorly. Yeah, well, of course, you weirdo. Yeah. So we mentioned earlier that they almost hit a dog on the way in. She does end up go out and feed it at one point, some of the Kobe beef that he had delivered for their weekend. But then, so I skipped the part where he has a heart attack. I assume that happens in the book, because that's like the whole main incident of the movie is that he dies and she's handcuffed to the bed. So after that happens, he falls onto the floor, and after she's there for a little bit, the dog from earlier wanders into the house. A great tension building moment in the movie of like we hearing sounds and don't know what it is, and the camera kind of slowly, because we're trapped in her perspective, which I have a note about later that I think works really well for a horror film or like a thriller. But the dog wanders in and kind of sits there at first, and then after a few minutes it goes over and starts licking Gerald's blood, because he like cracks his head on the floor when he falls off the bed, and then starts like biting pieces off Gerald's arm. And I wanted to know if the dog starts eating Gerald in the book.
Yes, Gerald does become dog chow. The movie actually has the dog stay in the room with Jesse, which I thought was a nice additional layer of horror.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very interesting, and because it comes back later in certain ways, but yeah, for sure. So then, kind of surprisingly, she passes out for a little bit, and then she I think she passes out. I can't remember, but at some point we move forward in time a little bit, and all of a sudden Gerald stands up and starts talking to Jesse, and she's like, "What the hell?" And she's like freaking out. So she's like, "Oh, thank God you're alive." And then she like glances over and sees that his body is still on the floor.
Yeah.
And realizes in that moment that she is hallucinating Gerald. I wanted to know if the hallucination version of Gerald, like if she talks to a dead version or living dead version of Gerald after he dies in the book, because then also later a different version of Jesse appears, who's like a more confident version of Jesse, and she's like having a conversation with both of them kind of throughout the movie, talking through stuff. And I wanted to know if that narrative element of her talking to both Gerald and Jesse or herself came from the book.
Okay. So this is the major way that the movie deviates from the book. There's no hallucination Gerald or Jesse in the book. Jesse does start to have conversations with voices in her head, who become kind of characters in their own right. There's no indication that she like sees them.
Right, that they're like that she imagines them physically existing.
No, there's not really, at least not that I picked up on any implication of that. But she has conversations with these characters who represent like different aspects of herself. And one of them she calls Good Wife Burlingame, which is her technically, but it's like a submissive like proper wife,
Mm.
proper woman kind of version of her.
Yeah.
And then the other is her college roommate, Ruth, who Jessie remembers as being very bold and brash. She does also talk to her childhood self, but that's not till like much later in the book. So throughout the book, she like learns to accept all of these different aspects of herself and work with them in order to get out of her predicament.
Okay.
So I think the movie is doing something really similar from like a thematic standpoint.
Oh, absolutely.
The hallucinations still represent,
Yeah.
I think, different aspects of her psyche, and she still needs them in order to get out of this situation that she's found herself in.
Yeah, because the Jessie character, the one that appears, is her confident, like
Yeah, that's like her confident persona.
version of herself, and then Gerald is all of her doubts and like insecurities basically manifest.
Ultimately, this change was kind of 6 of 1 for me. I think it's a good movie decision, especially for just like baseline not having to introduce or explain any new characters.
That's true, and it also gives I think it creates a really interesting dynamic with Gerald.
Yeah.
Of having him like be both this manifestation of her insecurity, but also saying the things that feels like Gerald would say. So like because he is like he did like feed on her insecurities as a person. So and like her that sort of thing. So I think it makes perfect sense and works really well and is super compelling. Also gives some really good visual moments. There's this one great shot where it's Gerald's laying there dead on the floor. She's handcuffed to the bed, and then Gerald and Jessie are both standing on either side. The other versions of them are both standing on both sides of the bed, like next to her. It's like this, and we get like a wide shot of it. It's like this really weird tableau. I thought it was really cool.
I will say the one thing that I did kind of miss from the book was Good Wife Burlingame. I thought there was some obvious like kind of second wave feminism type commentary going on with that character. So maybe Mike Flanagan and co just felt like it was outdated. But I thought she ended up being kind of an interesting character in her own right because she starts out obviously like very annoying.
Yeah.
In kind of a wet blanket, but we end up coming to learn that there are like aspects of that part of Jessie's personality that she does need.
Yeah.
That like kind of calmness.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. So she's been handcuffed to the bed now for hours and she's getting very fatigued. She's passed out a couple times, but she's obviously very dehydrated. Gerald mentions to her that she's dehydrated and that she'll obviously die if she doesn't get some water. And then we get this very clever way that she remembers the glass of water above her on the headboard or on the bookcase above her is that they kind of the multiple versions of herself talk her or Gerald and Jessie talk her through like what happened when they got there. And through the course of that, she realizes, oh my God, that's right. There's that glass of water that he set on the bookshelf above me. And I wanted to know if that played out the same way in the book, because I thought that was really cool. And if she's able to like slide it in, because she in the movie, in order to get it, it's like in the middle, and she can't reach the middle because the way her hands are handcuffed, so she has to literally tip the shelf, and the glass of water slides, and she catches it at the end of the bookcase. And I wanted to know because that was impressive. Did she pull it off like that in the movie or in the book?
So there's no Viagra in the book.
Yeah, which is why he has the glass of water.
Yeah. And I don't recall there being any like cool memory trick that makes her remember the glass of water. I think she just like knows that it's up there.
Oh, okay.
But otherwise this plays out pretty much the same. She has to like manipulate the shelf until the glass slides down into her hand.
Yeah. I just thought I really liked, because I think it feeds into like they're talking about like why this all started and like him being like having ED or whatever, and they're like how that was an issue in their relationship, and slowly meanders back around to him taking like the Viagra pill, and Gerald's like, no, it's a good thing I did, or something like that, and she's like, what are you talking about? And then like realizes, oh, the glass of water. I just thought it was really clever.
Yeah. Fun fact, I had to look this up. Viagra not available in the US until 1998. which was 6 years after the book was published. So obviously, no Viagra in the book.
Yes, right. That obviously that makes sense. So the other thing that I liked about the Jesse that isn't handcuffed to the bed, the alternate Jesse, the confident Jesse who shows up, is that she kind of talks her through situations like she did with the Viagra thing. Although I think that might have mostly been Jared, but or
Gerald.
Gerald. But her alternate Jesse kind of like talks her through stuff and like helps her puzzle things out in the same way, like when you're in your own head, kind of thinking about things, you can kind of puzzle things out. But it's a, it gives us as an audience a way to kind of literally be a part of that and watch it play out like a dialogue, which is cool. And it reminded me a little bit of the film Hush, which was another Mike Flanagan film, I think from like the year before this. I mentioned the prequel, the book that she throws at the dog in this movie. If you didn't listen to the prequel, she throws a copy of a book called Midnight Mass that was written by the character in Hush. The character in Hush, played by Kate Siegel, is an author, and she writes a book called Midnight Mass.
Mm-hmm.
Well, she doesn't in that movie. In this one, her character's name is the author name on Midnight Mass, and then Midnight Mass will go on to be a TV show. Anyways, very fun. But I wanted to know if, and in Hush, the point of that is, in Hush, she's an author, so she like works through, she like writes scenarios in her head, and it's like helps her like figure out like what she's gonna do to survive this home invasion scenario that she's in, which I thought was really clever. And we actually see things play out and then not play out, which this movie does too. I thought was when she escapes, when the first Jessie escapes from the bed and we think she's free. Like I didn't, obviously, because I knew what the premise of the movie was. I knew she didn't escape like 15 minutes into the movie. But a very similar things happen in Hush, where we see the main character do stuff and then like she gets killed. And she's like, and then it like snaps back and she's like, well, I won't do that. Yeah, like don't do that. And so I thought that was clever. And I want to know if it came from the book or if it's a Mike Flanagan thing, because again, it reminded me so much of Hush.
Yeah, the book does kind of a similar thing. The aforementioned characters in her head do this for her. They kind of like talk her through and like coax her towards the answers that she needs.
Yeah, it's interesting. Because and that's like my next question here is, I wasn't really expecting so much of this to be about like the actual physical stuff she had to do to survive. Like I expected it to be, which it primarily is about like the emotional like things that are going on. But there is like a significant amount of the movie, and a lot of the tension does come from like the physical survival scenario that she is in, which is kind of interesting and really wasn't what I was expecting. And I was comparing it to like an episode of MacGyver, because what she does here is that she remembers the glass of water. She's able to get it, but she can't drink it because she can't get it to her mouth.
Yeah.
So she then remembers that she has the receipt from the slip that she got up on the bookcase, and she's able to grab that and roll it up with one hand, which was incredibly impressive. I don't think I could do that without dropping it, and put it in her mouth and then use that as a straw to drink the water. And I wanted to know if that came from the book, because I was like, wow, very, very impressive.
Yeah, it does. It's not a clothes tag in the book. It's like a paper insert from a magazine. Remember those?
Yeah.
But the outcome is the same. She like rolls it into a straw to use.
Yeah. No, yeah, like I said, and I actually like the kind of weird, I like that the movie, and I guess the book by extension, does give us those, like the actual practical, like kind of survival stuff that is also going on while simultaneously dealing with all of the emotional trauma that's going on, that she's kind of processing through all of this.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah. So she's able to drink some water, and then she passes out again, and she wakes up in the middle of the night, and it's pitch black, and she sees some movement in the corner of her room, and like in the shadows, and then all of a sudden, out of the darkness, the indistinct figure. The first time we see it, you can't really, just see a little bit of it, kind of lit by moonlight, hence his name, the Moonlight Man. But she sees this big, gigantic, terrifying looking man that kind of looms out of the darkness in the corner, and she's like, doesn't really think he's real. She closes her eyes. She's like, it's not real. It's not real. And I wanted to know if that scene came from the book, and her being unsure if it's real or not.
Yes, all of that is from the book. The movie was not as spooky as I imagined it.
Okay.
But it is from the book.
I thought that scene was pretty spooky.
It was pretty spooky. It's just not as spooky as what I imagined.
I mean, it's often hard for that to be the case. Like, it's
Yes.
very rarely is something as spooky as you can imagine it, because your brain knows what scares it more than Mike Flanagan does, generally speaking. So, yeah, but I really like that scene. I had a note about it later, but it makes sense to talk about it here. I really enjoyed that scene, that moment, because again, I mentioned earlier, we're trapped in Jesse's perspective. We're tied to the bed with her. Like, we cut around outside of that, but a lot of the time we are trapped kind of from her perspective, or at least when the movie wants us to be, in a way that I thought was really effective. And it really played, in this scene in particular, really plays into some very primal, like, fear of darkness kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because there's these dark corners of the room, and she's an adult. If she was, she could just turn the light on or she could walk over there, but she literally cannot do that in this scenario. And it kind of immediately transports you back to being like a little kid in your room, scared of the shadows in the corner, and you're too scared to even get out of, like go look or do anything. So you just hide under the covers or whatever. And I thought it did a really effective job of kind of capturing that type of suspense and like spookiness in a way that I thought was kind of fun, the way it was able to play with that. So then we get into the main meat of like what is actually going on here, sort of in that is the root of all of the issues kind of emotionally and with their relationship. And I don't say the issues of their relationship. This is the relationship is that he's an asshole, but the part of the reason that they've never had a very communicative and is a relationship is because she has this trauma from her childhood that she is kind of buried and doesn't.
Well, and then this unhealed trauma is also the reason that she gravitates to him in the first place too.
Yes. Yeah. So we flash back and we see, and I talked about this all in the summary, but that she went on a vacation with her family to go see an eclipse. Family goes out in the boat, leaving her and her dad to watch it, and her dad sexually assaults her. And I wanted to know if that, obviously I assume that all happened in the book, but specifically the important, or not important, but one of the like big visual elements in the movie is that this all takes place during a solar eclipse. And like we get we see the eclipse happening, and the assault actually happens during the eclipse, and everything is like bathed in this blood red light, which if you've seen an eclipse is not what it actually looks like. But I was wondering if the element of the solar eclipse came from the book, because I thought that was interesting, and I was trying to figure out what we're doing symbolically there, and I want to talk about that. So does that happen in the book?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Because initially I was like, is this just an excuse to make it like red and creepy? Because we get like this like horrifying lighting. Like, while this is...
I think yes and no, because as we've said, that's not what an eclipse looks like. Not what an
eclipse looks like. It just looks like nighttime is what it looks like when you like during the actual eclipse, basically. And they did not capture the well, because it's all red, I guess.
Right.
But like what is the word? Not Coriolis, but the...
I don't know what the word is.
When the actual eclipse happens, you get the big white like halo around.
the ring
The ring, which is just, if you've never seen a solar eclipse, it's one of the coolest things you will ever see, and I cannot recommend enough going to see a solar eclipse. But so I was trying to like, okay, maybe they just wanted like, because it's super creepy and weird, and like, it is like a very surreal experience.
Yes, it
already
absolutely
anyways.
is.
Especially the moments leading up to, and like the way the lighting gets, whatever. It's very interesting. And so I was like, okay, it's just a good visual thing to do to make during this creepy scene. But then as I thought about it more, and I was like, okay, I also see what we're doing here in the sense of this is an event we especially find out later that she has basically blocked out of her mind.
Yeah.
And basically memory hold and is like completely decided to just.
Yeah, she's completely compartmentalized it.
Yeah. Because of a scene we'll talk about later. But and I was like, oh, so that makes perfect sense then in retrospect that the eclipse there then becomes symbolism of, because the eclipse is the moon obscuring the sun. And in the same way that she has sort of memory hold or black hold this event in her life, the eclipse blocks the sun, like it's a thing blocking another thing. It feels like pretty obvious what we're going for symbolically.
Yeah, no, I think you're right about the symbolism. And in the book, it's, and not that it isn't this in the movie, but because we're in her perspective in the book, we're able to like get into it a little more. But like at the very beginning of the book, before she starts kind of diving into this previous trauma and actually like remembering it, she doesn't even remember that it was an eclipse.
Oh, really?
She just has this vague memory of everything going dark.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and that ties into another thing we'll talk about later. With the lighting thing. We'll talk about that's so good.
Also, I just want to say that the funniest thing to me about Mike Flanagan making everything turn blood red during an eclipse is that Stephen King actually nailed like the description of like what the light does, like especially like leading up to it, where it's getting,
which the movie's not that far off.
No, because it gets like, it's such a weird experience. It gets like progressively dimmer,
but not in a way,
but not like it does at
dusk.
sunset. No,
it's
far weirder
than that. Very different and way weirder. Yeah, it just gets dimmer, but it doesn't, because the sun's still above you, or wherever, the sun's still in roughly the same spot, so it doesn't do the thing that a sunset does. But yeah, it gets, and I think the movie kind of captures that very weird surreal light experience, because again, the light is still coming from above, but it's just way less.
Yeah, and it's being like filtered, and like the shadows look weird.
It's very interesting, but yeah, the red thing is just like, this is just a very visually striking, horrifying kind of moment, and dialing that up with the red. I think Mike Flanagan probably knows what an eclipse looks like. Whether or not he's seen one, I'm sure he at least could have Googled what it looks like.
I feel pretty confident that Stephen King has.
Yeah. So then we flash back, or we back to the current timeline after we see that flashback. And Jessie is discussing what happened with herself and with Gerald, I think.
Yeah, it's with Gerald.
And he has this just horrible line that I wanted to know if came from the book, is that he talks about how that she had just had her first period, because she was like 12, I think, at the time. And she had just had her first period. And he says, and the dog, in this moment, the dog is still sitting in the room, like chewing on Gerald's flesh or whatever in the doorway. And he kind of looks at the dog and looks back at her, and they're talking about how she just had her period for the first time. And he says he smelled the blood and did what dogs do. And I wanted to know if that line came from the book, because Jesus Christ.
So that exact line isn't from the book, but this is. She started when she was only 10 and a half. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe he smelled blood, just like that dog out in the entry. Maybe it made him frantic. The movie's version is, in my opinion, more impactful, but obviously pulled from that.
Yes, it was just to quote. Take that and kind of condense it down into its most distilled, upsetting form. Yeah. Well, and more directly does what we're doing about men, which is like comparing them to dogs in this scenario, where obviously the book is doing that, but it's not as directly doing it as the movie's line does. Then the next day she wakes up, and one of the things she realizes is Gerald points out to her, like, hey, look down on the floor. You see that? And she sees this kind of thing in the blood that kind of looks like a footprint.
Yeah.
And he's like, if that guy in the corner wasn't real, why is there a footprint? She's like, that's probably not, whatever. And I wanted to know if that came from the book, if like this idea that maybe this Moonlight Man was real, because she sees like a footprint or something.
So she does see what she thinks could be a footprint, but it's in mud, not blood.
Yeah.
She also sees a pearl earring on the floor, which the movie completely omits. I'm fine with those changes, because I think that I felt like it was a little obvious in the book.
Oh,
like,
you think?
If there's mud on the floor now, and there wasn't before,
right? Like,
then obviously the mud had to come from somewhere. I guess it could have come from the dog, yeah. Whereas in the movie, I felt like just like the smear of blood was a little bit more.
It was vague enough that it's like it doesn't necessarily mean it's a footprint.
Come from
the dog or something. Yeah. It doesn't necessarily. It kind of looked like a footprint, but it also
could have just been like a smear of blood.
Yeah. I want to stress at this point, I was still fully when I'm writing these questions, I was still fully under the assumption that Moonlight Man was not real. If you have seen the movie or listened to the summary,
why would you be under any other assumption?
You will know that is not the case, but we will get to that.
We'll get to that.
Because boy, do we have thoughts. Anyways, then we flash back again, and in maybe the most upsetting in two different ways. There's a very physically upsetting scene coming up shortly, but this is maybe the most emotionally upsetting scene in the movie. At least it was to me, is that her dad comes in and talks to her after he had assaulted her, and because they're getting ready to have dinner after her mom has come back with their siblings. And he's like talking to her, and he manipulates her into keeping it a secret. He's like, we should tell mom. And he comes in and is like saying, we should tell her what happened. Because if we like wait until later, it'll be worse. Like, we just need to do it now, that sort of thing. We need to take our medicine, which is a Shining line, I'm pretty sure.
Mm-hmm.
When he said that, I was like, I'm pretty sure somebody says that either in The Shining or Doctor Sleep, which I'm 100% sure.
I'm pretty sure that's from The Shining.
Yeah. I think Jack says something about taking his medicine or something like that. But then he soft pedals it and is like, but, like, things have been rough between your mom and I. And if she hears about this, she because she was like, she'll, because her and her mom have had tension because she's a preteen.
She's grown up,
daughter, like a preteen girl. So she's, at that age where you start having falling out with your parents often. And so he's like, look, and your relationship has been bad. This will just make it way worse. And basically manipulates her into being like, no, we should keep it a secret.
Yeah.
And then that is kind of what causes her to like truly like memory hole it, basically.
Right. Because now she believes that was her choice.
Yes. He manipulates it into thinking it was her choice to keep it a secret, essentially. And like I said, it was one of the more brutally uncomfortable scenes. And just this movie in general is one of the harder to watch movies I've watched in a while. And we just watched Rosemary's Baby not that long ago, which is nothing compared to this in a lot of ways. But I wanted to know if that scene played out like that in the book.
The scenes are very similar, but I have to give this one to the book. Being in Jessie's perspective and being in her mind as she's trying to like think through this ultimately falls for his manipulation was viscerally horrifying in a way that I have not experienced in a while.
I can imagine. It's horrible watching the movie, and you can kind of see, because the actress does a really good job.
Yeah, she does a really good job.
The actress playing the younger Jessie does a really good job, and you can see on her face her going through that like mental calculation and trying to figure out like what to do and that sort of thing. And so you can infer a lot of what's going on in her head in a way that's also really horrifying, because it's kind of like we were talking about, where like what I'm imagining is almost as horrifying as I can imagine reading like her thoughts would be. But I can't. Reading that would be very hard. So then we cut forward, and she's passed out again, and then she that's right. Then after that scene in the past, she like falls on the bed and is laying there. And then she looks down, like the young Jessie is, and she looks down and sees a dog licking her foot.
She hallucinates the moonlight guy.
She sees the moonlight guy licking her foot, and then it cuts, and it's the dog, and then we're back in current time, and it's current Jessie still handcuffed to the bed, and the dog's licking her foot. But I wanted to know if the scene of the creepy guy licking her foot came from the book.
No, and I have to say that I didn't really care for this addition.
Really?
In the movie. I thought it was kind of a cheap jump scare.
It's a little bit of a cheap jump scare, but I thought it was one that worked because the dog is there and the idea of it licking her foot makes sense.
Yeah.
And so like then her psyche turning that into the creepy guy she saw, I like thought it like totally worked like narratively.
I'm
you know what I mean?
not saying it doesn't work. I just thought it was a little cheap.
Fair enough. So she then wakes up, and now she realizes she's got to get out of here because nobody's coming for her, and she's gonna die if she stays in this bed much longer, because she's out of water basically at this point. She hasn't eaten in over like 2 days or whatever, among other things, obviously.
Yeah, and like physical symptoms of
circulation being cut off in her arms from being handcuffed to the bed and all that sort of stuff. So she has to get out of there, and she realizes that what she needs to do. She has a memory again of her childhood where after the dinner after the assault happened, she like squeezed a drinking glass and it shattered in her hand, and she like cut her hand all up. And this is what triggers her memory, or triggers her to think that, she can slice her hand open and use the blood to like lubricate it to slide her hand out. But more importantly, slice like some of the flesh off in order to make it easier. And then I want to know, so that's what she does. And now I will say, I think the movie does this symbolically. She slits her wrist in the movie, and that feels like not like why. I'm not sure why she does that necessarily, because they make a point of like, you need to slit your wrist, but not too deep, because then you'll get enough blood that it'll. But what the thing that ends up being the important part is that she slits enough of the flesh off that it is able to pull.
Right.
So I don't know, the wrist slitting to me feels very symbolic, and like she's dealing with this trauma. It's symbolic, like she could have killed herself or something, but it's a similar action, but it's actually saving her. You know what I mean? Like I feel like we're doing something there with like kind of the parallel of what's going on. But I wanted to know if that happens in the book, because then she starts, after she cuts her wrist and part of her hand, she starts yanking her hand out of the handcuff, and I'm not going to go into details, but it's maybe the worst thing I've seen in a movie, like the worst gore I've seen in a movie. I don't even want to say worse in the sense of like I've seen gorier things, but this is I don't know if I full body cringed that hard watching a movie in like
I'm uncomfortable thinking about it.
In like a long time. The most visceral, like, oh my God, reaction to gore I've had in years. And I wanted to know if it played out similarly in the book.
Yes, it does. And I will fully admit two things. One, I actually almost threw up reading this scene. I was sitting on the couch. I don't know if you heard me or noticed me.
Yeah, maybe. I don't remember. Because I don't know what you're reading at any given point, so or like
I was physically ill. I was like gagging,
I can imagine.
And like felt like that like nauseous, like I'm gonna barf sensation. And two, I closed my eyes and plugged my ears during this scene of the movie. I already knew what was happening. I'd had enough. I didn't need any more.
I saw some of it and I closed. I did not. Like I said, I full body physically like cringed and was like, oh my God, and had my hands over my ears and closed my eyes for parts of it. Like I kept looking to be like, oh, is it like, but it was awful. Incredibly effectively done special effects. Like whoever,
obviously everything very well done.
Yeah,
start to finish.
Yeah, I mean it has the effect it's supposed to have in the best and worst way possible. So kudos, but man, oh man, it is something else. So then she's able to get her hand out, and then she tries to the phone and can't get the phone. The phone's dead. They were talking about how he always forgets to charge it. So their phone's dead. So she's able to get over to the sink though and get the handcuff key, and is able to undo the handcuffs and get out. And now she's bleeding obviously to death because she's sliced open her whole hand and forearm. And so she grabs some, there's like towels everywhere, but she opens a drawer and pulls out some sanitary pads that are in there.
Which she has to unwrap.
And then wraps them around her wrist to staunch the bleeding. And I wanted to know if she used sanitary pads in the film or in the book, because I thought the symbolism was kind of on the nose here.
Yes, she does. And yes, it is so on the nose, which I think is also not helped by the fact that I did not read that as like a real action that a real person would take.
So you said that, and then I was like, I feel like I've heard people talk about this before. I swear somewhere I have heard on like some podcast or something I listened to that a potentially good emergency option for traumatic injuries like that, if you don't have actual like gauze or bandages, is to use like sanitary pads. Because one, they're relatively sanitary compared to other things because they are wrapped up and, they're designed to be sanitary, and they're also designed to absorb and contain blood. Like, so they're actually not like a terrible option.
I'm not saying that it's not that it's not a reasonable option, or that you can't like reason and logic your way to that. I just don't think that a real person in that scenario would be like, yes, the pads.
I will say, I would say most people wouldn't, but like I said, I think I heard somebody on a podcast mention it. Like, so I think the context I heard this in was like during some protests, listening to like leftist podcasts talking about like if you need to treat specific like gunshot wounds or stab wounds or whatever, that sanitary pads are like a good emergency way to do. Like, I think it's actually like an out there in the world piece of advice that some people have banging around in their heads. Fair enough. I have not confirmed whether or not it's actually good advice or not, but I swear I heard somebody mention it in the context of like, this is a thing some people will tell you to do because it's like a pretty good thing to do. And so I don't know for sure that like how many people have heard that advice. And again, I have no idea if it's actually good advice or not. It seems reasonable to me, but anyways. So after she staunches the bleeding, she's getting ready to leave the house, but then she gets to the hallway and she looks down, and at the end of the hallway, the Moonlight Man is there leering at her at the end of the hallway, and she walks up to him, and he just kind of looks at her, and she pulls her wedding ring off because he has this big bag. He's shown her this bag that it's like full of bones and like jewelry, basically.
Very folkloric.
Yeah. And she pulls her wedding ring off and puts it in the bag. Again, obviously very symbolic. She's basically paying the toll here to death or whatever. But also, remove it, like the symbol of her
removing
marriage,
the shackles
of her relationship
to Gerald.
Yes, exactly. So we get a nice 2-for-1 there. But I wanted to know if that moment came from the book.
Yes, it does. On her way out, she sees him. He's in Gerald's study. Like, as she's leaving, she like looks into the room and sees him in there. Like, I do think at the end of the hall is creepier and more symbolic. But she does give him her wedding ring, like she's paying the ferryman to cross the river Styx, and continues on her way out.
Yeah. And I just want to add my second sentence on this question here, as I was writing it as we were watching the movie, was surely this guy isn't real, right? More on that in just a second. So then she gets out, she gets in the car, drives, and she crashes into a tree. Not really that important. Some people run up and find her as she's like kind of bleeding on the ground. And then we cut, and she wakes up, and we cut, and then we get her writing a letter. And it's some time has passed.
It's like 6 months later or something.
And she's writing this letter to her younger self.
Yes.
Basically. And we see she has like a little like thing on her hand from where her injury was. And so she writes this letter, and that she uses to basically explain to us as the audience everything that happened after she was found by, these people. She talks about like going to the hospital and like telling the police, but like kind of being vague about the details and saying she had amnesia, so she didn't have to explain everything. But then I guess she did explain everything to at least somebody, because she says that the lawyers at her husband's company like kept all the detail secrets, so somebody knew what was like. Anyways, point being, and I was like, I wanted to know if this came from the book, this letter, because to me, as we're getting to this point, and I wrote this question at the beginning of part of this letter where she's like going through, and she's like, oh, and then I got the money. Like, they basically wrote it down as like a heart attack and confirmed my story, and then I was able to get his insurance money, and I started this foundation for survivors of sexual assault, blah blah. And I'm like, okay, this is like kind of a clunky way to do this. Like, I'm not sure how else you would end this, but like this is kind of clunky, and I wanted to know if like this letter wrapping things up came from the book.
So we do end the book with her writing a letter. A massive letter. But in the book, she's writing to Ruth, her former college roommate, and she actually mails it, despite not having had any contact with Ruth for like a decade, or at least it's strongly implied that she's gonna mail it. So it's kind of clunky either way.
Yeah.
But I do prefer the movie's version of having her write to her younger self. I feel like that's a pretty common therapy thing.
That's true, yeah.
And she also isn't going to traumatize a former friend. Like, imagine getting a letter from a college friend that you haven't seen or spoken to for a decade, and it's just a small novel detailing all of this horrific shit they went through. I wouldn't even know what to do.
I'd be like, well, wow. All right. Yeah, I don't even know how you would begin to handle that.
I need the follow-up to this book that's about Ruth getting this letter and being like, what the fuck?
Yeah. No, I agree. In comparison to what you're describing in the book, I do think the movie's version works better. And it's not that like what she's doing doesn't make sense. Like writing a letter to her younger self, like you said, as like a therapy thing.
Yeah.
Totally makes sense. That being said, it still reads as clunk, because the movie has been so expertly crafted until this point, very much show
and the novel as well.
Yeah, like so very much show don't tell, and like even though we have the conceit of her talk, like we get this conceit of her talking to Gerald and herself after Gerald is dead, and like the alternate version of herself, which is kind of also like a I think you could argue, some people might argue, kind of a hack way to get us to be able to like see the dialogue that's happening. I think it works really well and comes across perfectly. This part with the letter, even though the act itself is like perfectly reasonable
thing to do,
it just as a movie like
its inclusion as a storytelling device is giving college writing course.
It just feels so disparate from how well crafted the rest of the film was.
Yeah.
And then we get this letter
No,
of her
I felt the same way reading the
just
book.
voiceover explaining everything that happened. It's like, okay, it's like just that classic, like, well, like villain monologue at the end, or so, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
this isn't a villain monologue, but it's that kind of thing where you're like, all right, this is kind of a hack way to do this, but whatever.
And I do think, and I kind of feel the same way about the book, I think if it had ended with her crashing the
Yes.
car
Yeah.
and the light fading out,
Yes.
and we're not sure if she actually lived or if maybe she died on the bed and she really
Yeah.
was paying the ferryman.
And I will say, we'll get to it in a second, I do think it's possible you can read the movie that way. But
yes.
But that being said, I agree.
I think that's a stronger ending.
I agree that's a stronger ending, but I also I like the movie deciding to give us a more concrete, happy ending. I think it's good because I like the message.
Sure.
And I like giving us a triumphant ending for Jesse. I just think it doesn't do it. We'll get into it, right?
We'll get into it
right now.
Right now.
Yeah. So I'm just going to read my next question here, which was, as the letter was going on, I wrote, wait, ... Is the Moonlight Man real? Okay, this monologue where she just explains everything is unreal. This feels like a joke. Is this a joke? Because she, one day she gets a newspaper and sees the guy
Yeah.
in the newspaper that she saw in the house.
Yeah.
And his name is Raymond something Jobert or something.
Yeah.
And he is a serial grave robber, cannibal,
He's every kind of criminal.
necrophile,
Yes.
like every bad thing you
Yes.
can think of. He has been accused of, like just everything. And she realizes, and then we get this montage of her like putting together like news stories and she's writing this in a letter to her younger self, which is also insane, like a weird thing. But she's like, oh, and he was real, and like blah, blah, blah. And so does all of a sudden it get revealed that this guy was real, the Moonlight Man is real, and he's a real guy, serial killer, serial necrophile cannibal man?
Oh, yes. Unfortunately, there is no joke happening here. But I did kind of enjoy watching you react to the end of the movie the exact same way that I reacted to the end of the book. I looked over at you and we've made the same face and everything. It turns into an entirely different story in the 9th inning.
I was stunned. I could not believe what I was seeing. Like it didn't feel real. Like it especially because even the way it's filmed feels, and again, this goes back to my like, maybe it isn't real. Like, I think there is an interpretation of this ending that is she dies or maybe doesn't die, but when she crashes and passes out and we see the people running up to her, that's the last like real moment of the movie. I think you could read the movie that way, and maybe she survives, maybe she dies, but everything else is like in her head. This ending that we see, because again, it's shot so weird. It's like the weird like montages of the like shots of the news clippings and everything feels wrong. Anyways, I couldn't believe it. And then she sees that he's getting arraigned for all of these crimes that he has. So she's going to go confront him at the trial. She's like, I need to go show him that I'm alive or whatever, because he was there. That was him. And she strolls into the trial, walks right in, and he turns around and he busts out of his handcuffs and he like mocks her and he's like, you're made of moonlight. You're not real. And so before we get to what she says, I wanted to know if she goes to confront him at his trial, because I get what the movie was going for here with her confront. He is the literal physical embodiment of the evil men in her life.
Yes.
And we like the movie again in the way that is compared to so much of the rest of the movie. It's so ham-fisted. Like, it turns into her husband, it turns into her dad briefly, and then it's him, and then she gets to have this moment. But the through line on all of this is so slapdash because, and we'll get into it, but like he does not,
he's not remotely connected to those things.
That's the thing, is that like him being the representational figure of her, like the stand-in for her husband and her dad, doesn't
It does not compute.
He doesn't represent those things. He's a cannibal.
He's a cartoon monster.
He's a cartoon monster who eats dead people. Like it doesn't connect at all. And so I want to know if that came from the book.
It does. It's such a weird, like almost surreal scene in both the book and the movie that I think we're supposed to just take at face value. The fact that it's so
surreal is the only saving grace I can get the movie of make me think maybe it's not supposed to be real.
Maybe.
But I also think it is because it is.
Like
it, because otherwise it's like, what is the point of doing?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I agree with you. Like I don't know what the point of doing all of that would be if it's not
like
supposed
fake,
to be
if it's
real.
like if she died and it's all in her head, like so as she
because
died,
if that is the case, if she is dead or whatever, then again, to go back to what I was saying, having the movie end after she crashes the car is then the much stronger ending.
Right. Well, yes, I agree. It's a stronger ending anyways. But if she is dead, this doesn't. I guess the idea would be that this gives her some closure before she dies. Like doing this gives her as a person some like healing and closure to like confront him as this. Like I don't know. Again, I agree. I don't think that's the reading. I think we're supposed to read this as all actually happening.
Yes.
I think. I'm like 90% sure.
I feel fairly confident. I'm at like 95%. Because I just don't understand the decision all the way around. Like if I squint, I can kind of see like the connection that we're supposed to make and the idea that we're supposed to get from it. But having the Moonlight Man, the thing that seems to very obviously be a hallucination, actually be real, could be interesting.
Yeah, like she finds out, at the end, oh my God, he was real the whole time.
An interesting story element. But I don't think it adds anything to or works in this story.
Not at all.
It was already a nuanced and horrific psychological horror story exploring the real life monsters in this woman's life.
Yes.
And we didn't need a cartoon monster at the end.
Yes. That was the big thing for me. It's like, I can see the idea being interesting.
Yes. In a different story.
In a different movie, a different story entirely. It just doesn't make any sense in this story. Again, assuming it is real, like assuming we're supposed to take it at face value and that the events from her crashing the car to the end of the movie actually did take place in quote unquote reality, it does not make any sense with this story.
And then like on top of that, I was having like a fit reading this in the book because we get so much more of his like backstory and list of crimes.
Oh, we get a lot of it in the movie.
And we get a lot of it in the movie.
At the end, she just reads it all out.
There's so much more in the book. This goes on for like pages and pages and pages. So as we mentioned, he's like every kind of criminal that you could possibly think of.
Pretty much.
He's done it all.
He's a serial killer. He's a serial, he'd like grave robber initially. Then he started eating the corpses. Then he started killing people to eat them. Then it was, and
murder. And then in the book, they also talk about he's like a pedophile and he also kills animals.
And like every bad thing.
Every bad thing you can possibly think of, which is why I call him like a cartoon monster. Because it's farcical.
Yeah.
But he's also like he has this like genetic
which
is a real thing.
Yes, yeah.
That causes like different parts of your body to be like abnormally large.
Yes.
So he's like this genetically like disabled, deformed guy who also very clearly has mental issues.
Seems to be developmentally something.
Who also is heavily implied to be like queer of some sort, because they say that he only rapes the male corpses.
Right.
And then also in the book, they say that he also likes to dress up in women's lingerie.
I'll say that's not mentioned in the movie, I don't think, but yeah.
So we have like all of this together, and it's so many layers of problematic that it's downright comical.
Yeah.
Like it's a fucking farce. It's hilarious. Like, what are we doing?
Yeah. I could not believe that I was like, what are we doing? To the point where I respect Mike Flanagan too much, and the rest of the movie is just too good for it to be the actual ending of for that to be the real thing that happens. Like, I just can't believe that you would make that ending after so carefully crafting such a well done story. about trauma and dealing with trauma and confronting the toxic men in your life. Like, it's so good. And then in the end, I'm like, and it's so quick. It's like it's like 7 minutes at the monologue montage at the end of just insanity. I could not believe it was. Again, I was like, I got to a point where I was like basically pleading with myself, like, this can't be it has to be fake. It has to be something happening in her mind as she's either dying or is like, in the hospital recovering or something, like whichever version of that you want to. Like, it almost had to be that for me to like. I just couldn't believe that you could make such a. I don't know. Anyways.
I don't know. And I would love to know if Stephen King insisted and was like, you can only make an adaptation of my book if it includes this, because I have to imagine that Mike Flanagan was like, can we please
you would think
use something else?
I don't know. So then that gets me to the final question that I had here is that we get to I wanted to talk about the line that she says, because I was like, okay, that's a good line. The setup to get here was ridiculous. It's a good line, and to me, I felt like I almost knew this wasn't in the book. I was like, this line can't be in the book, because it feels like Mike Flanagan desperately trying to fucking tie a ribbon around all of this in a way that somewhat makes any sense at all, and it's remotely thematically coherent. Is that she approaches him, he yells at her or whatever, and she just looks at him and says, "You're so much smaller than I remember." And it works for all of the people. It works for the guy because he's a very large man, and who she saw this physical imposing person in the darkness and wasn't sure if it was real. Seeing her father in him, obviously, when you're a child, your father's, larger than life character, and being able to stand up to him. And then same for her husband, who's this powerful lawyer and all that sort of thing. And
who we also always see looming over her throughout the course of the
movie. And so this line works for all of, you're so much smaller than remember. It's a great line. Yeah. Incredible line. And I'm like, I guess maybe what it was is literally he came up with that line. So sorry, was that line in the book? I was like, surely it cannot be.
As you suspect.
I knew it.
This line was a movie edition. In the book, she just spits on him.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, 100%. I was like, that has to be yeah. And the only thing I could think is that maybe that's the other thing, is that maybe Mike Flanagan wrote that, or whoever. I don't want to say Mike Flanagan. There was a co-writer and several other, it may not have been Mike Flanagan specifically. But maybe Mike Flanagan or his co-writer wrote that line, came up with that line for the ending and was like, all right, now we got to do this ending because that line's too, it's too good of a moment. I agree. It's a great moment and it makes for a very satisfying conclusion. But it just, I wish we could have figured out a different way to get there. I wish we could have figured out some other way to get there. And this is cliche in its own way, but maybe she goes and it's at her father's grave or something. I don't know. Maybe he's dead, because we don't know if he's alive or dead at this point. We don't know anything about her parents or her family, what happened to them. Maybe she goes and she says that, we see her somewhere and she says that line and says, I don't know, whatever. It's just... And also, again, it works in that moment with the guy. It's just him being a real thing is
so stupid.
Stupid. It's just so stupid and thematically incongruous with the rest of the movie.
Completely disconnected from the rest of the story.
And again, the movie does its damnedest to try to wrap it back up, but it doesn't. Because it doesn't really change anything about. Sounds like it doesn't change anything about who that character is.
No.
So ultimately, it doesn't really fix anything, because that's the issue, is that the character doesn't. He's just a cartoon boogeyman monster. Yeah. He's not. He's not a physical representation of toxic masculinity or any. You know what I mean? He's not any of that stuff. Really, he's just. Yeah. Anyways, okay, that was it for my question.
Real quick, while we were on that tear, I just wanted to go back to in the prequel episode. I read a pull quote from a contemporary review of the novel.
Yes. Oh my goodness. And we were dunking
we were dunking on this review. So, writing for the New York Times, Wendy Doniger said, "Did Stephen King take on these heavy themes to prove that he is a real writer, not just a horror writer?
Yeah.
Was he trying to shift from writing good bad novels to writing good novels and ended up writing a bad good novel? The two genres cancel each other out. The horror makes us distrust the serious theme, and the serious theme stops us from suspending our disbelief to savor the horror. Mr. King seems handcuffed to his old technique, the tried and true formula, but perhaps it is now time for him to break loose from his past. To do this, he would have to confront what may well be his own personal horror, to try, perchance to fail, to write a good novel without any horror scenes. And we were kind of dunking on Wendy.
Yes.
Because it felt like she was just being a genre snob.
Right.
But now, having read the book, I feel like I owe Wendy an apology.
Yeah.
She was right.
I think she might have been right.
I didn't think the book was bad.
And the
I
movie's
thought
not bad,
I thought 90% of the book was great. But King is clearly attempting to do two different things, and they do not mesh well together at all.
And the movie
the movie's along for the ride.
As adaptations go, it is very faithful in that it goes down with the ship in the same way of just like, I guess this is what we're doing. And yeah, because it is equally riveting and brilliant for 95% of the runtime or whatever.
And then we tripped at the finish line.
The finish line is just woof. All right, I got one question that I wanted to discuss in Lost in Adaptation.
Just show me the way to get out of here, and I'll be on my way.
Where was it lost?
Yes, and I want to get unlost as soon as possible.
I don't know if you can help with this, but I was trying to figure out like how old they were supposed to be in the movie, but also like when it was supposed to take place. The modern time looks like it's supposed to take place in modern time, 2017 or whatever. 2017. And so I was trying.
She has like a smartphone.
Yeah, she has an iPhone that's like a
whatever
mid-generation
was
iPhone.
Recent
Yeah, like an iPhone 7 or something like that. But I wanted to know if the movie has concrete dates, because I don't know if there are any concrete dates if the book has any concrete dates, because I don't think the movie does or not. They may at some point on the radio when they're talking about the eclipse say a date, and I just missed it. But when does this take place? How old are they supposed to be? Because I couldn't tell when the flashback. The thing that really spawned it is that in the flashback in the movie, I was like, what decade is this supposed to be?
Yeah. So Jessie is in her late 30s in the book. She talks about being like just shy of 40 or like not quite 40. Gerald is implied to be older than her, but I don't think the book ever specifies how much older.
Yeah.
We do know exactly when the eclipse took place, though. July 20th, 1963, and it was an actual total solar eclipse,
which I would assume
that went through Maine.
Yeah, I assumed the movie was also probably like if they did mention a date, was probably a real one. I don't know why you wouldn't make it a real one.
Yeah, and we know that Jessie was like 10 or 11 at the time, so we can deduce that the book takes place sometime in the late 80s or early 90s.
Okay, well then I guess the movie's probably doing similarly, because the thing in the flashback, I was like, it just felt kind of. I thought that maybe they were trying to keep it kind of vague with like the set dressing and stuff to make it a little more timeless. Yeah. Like in the flashback.
And I do think that you're probably right about that, like overall, because the only thing in the flashback that looked to me somewhat grounded in a time period was the radio.
Yeah.
It looked really 80s.
It did. Like
but
the radio,
everything else was
like
kind
their
of
clothes didn't feel very specifically some period. You know what I mean? Like and like some of the other stuff, like the interior of the home didn't feel particularly like a certain decade. And again, that probably is a little intentional to make it a little more just like timeless, which I think works fine. But so assuming that's the case, so if it takes place, the eclipse is 63 and the movie and then current time in the book was like the early 90s, so like 30 years later roughly. If this would have been 30 years before 2017, that would be what, 1987? So yeah, that seems actually probably pretty much spot on. So okay. I think that also matches because I think Carlo Gugino at the time was in like around 40. So all right, those are all of my questions. It's time now to find out what Katie thought was better in the book.
You like to read?
Oh, yes. I love to read.
What do you like to read?
Everything.
I would be remiss to not mention Jessie's description of Gerald's penis because it is a scorching burn. Something meek and pink and circumcised. 5 inches of completely unremarkable erection.
Wow.
Got him.
That's kind of a movie nailed it. She does
She
jab at him
she
for
does
having a
jab
5-inch
at him
penis.
for his 5 inches. She does.
Which
yeah.
that's a perfectly reasonable size penis for all of our listeners out there.
Yes, it is.
Just in case you're self-conscious.
And honestly, you start getting too much bigger, it can be a problem. There's also another moment at the beginning of the book, like before Gerald dies, when she doesn't really want to be in this scenario, but she's kind of arguing with herself, and like at one point thinks to herself, just let him do it and it'll be done. And I was like, woof, okay. Been there. Didn't realize we were getting called out today. In the book, she also kicks Gerald when he won't stop, and like she kicks him in the balls and in the stomach. And it's kind of implied to be what sets off his heart attack. I don't know if that medically makes sense.
Well, I don't know about. I mean, yeah, like any sort of physical trauma that causes like a jolt of adrenaline, I would think.
Yeah, he won't stop coming all over her, and then she like gives him a couple good kicks.
Yeah. Sorry, the wording.
I know.
Wording.
I know.
Yeah.
I will say we just talked about the setting, and moving the story to a modern setting did bug me a little bit, because she doesn't even try to Hey Siri her phone.
It's true. It is an iPhone.
She didn't even give it an attempt.
She doesn't even try. And well, to be fair, I don't know what generation. I think would have been a generation that would have had Siri at that point.
I would think.
But you do also have to have it on. Not everybody turns theirs on. So, but
sure.
So maybe she just knew she didn't have it on, and so she didn't try it. But yeah, no, I agree. It is something.
But I think she could have tried it, and then they could have had like hallucination Gerald be like, "You don't like having that feature on, remember?"
Yeah.
Maybe they were afraid that they would get rid of Siri, and they didn't want to date it.
I think they just decided it wasn't worth explaining that, probably.
Not, but there are people like me. A little detail from the book that made me really angry, it was that when Gerald and Jesse like first got married, she had a part-time teaching job that she really loved, but he makes her quit her part-time teaching job because every time they did their taxes, the IRS saw like the tiny amount of money that she was making and thought he was like embezzling or something. So he makes her stop doing that. Another moment that really got me in the gut was during the scene where she's remembering her father abusing her. She remembers her father asking, "Do you love me?" And the line after that is, she was gripped by the terrible premonition that the right answer had become the wrong one.
Oof.
Yeah. And I thought the lead up to her father molesting her, I thought was much more like layered and complex in the book. The movie does a pretty good job, but there was something about the way that the book did it, which I'll talk more about later.
Yeah.
And also, he definitely does touch her in the book. Like, the movie changes that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they say he says like, "I didn't touch you," but I don't know how. I don't want to get into the logistics of it. But she's sitting on his lap I don't know how he couldn't.
Right. She's sitting on his lap. Yes, and that is from the book.
Yeah.
But there's much more specific things that happen in the book that the movie seems to have omitted.
Yeah.
She does, when she gets out of the one cuff after cutting her hand open, she does drag the bed over, like across the room to get to the handcuffs. Yeah. In the book, she basically has to push it across the entire room because the keys are over on the dresser, like on the other side of the room.
I thought that was fun though in the movie though, is initially she kicks it over so she can get to the phone.
Yeah.
And then when the phone doesn't work, she has to drag it back the other way so she can get to the bathroom, which I thought was fun.
And my last thing here is actually a thing I disliked about the movie, which is that I really hated the glowing red eyes in the Moonlight Man. I thought it looked really stupid and cheesy.
Yeah, I wasn't a big fan of it.
It was one of the things that for me made him not as scary.
Yeah. No, I could agree. And he doesn't always have them. I think he only has them at scenes where she actually is hallucinating him. Any of the scenes where he's actually there, he doesn't have the glowing red eyes. But your point stands. I also thought it wasn't a huge fan of it. So All right, let's go ahead and see what Katie thought was better in the movie.
My life has taught me one lesson, Hugo, and not the one I thought it would. Happy endings only happen in the movies.
I thought the Viagra for Gerald was a nice touch. I thought it was kind of a quick, easy way to show don't tell us more about what his whole deal with a capital D is. I also liked having him initially fall on top of her when he dies. In the book, he just falls off of the bed. But I thought that that was very dramatic, and I liked the visual then of like from above of him like laying on her.
Yes, no, I agree.
In the book, we get a very sad backstory for the dog telling us about how he was abandoned. I was fine with skipping that. I think we can deduce what happened with the dog. No need for more upsetting details. I also like Mouse as a childhood nickname better than Pumpkin, which was her nickname in the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it adds a layer of what are mice? They're quiet.
Yeah. Meek.
Yep.
The memory that triggers the idea to cut herself to get out of the handcuffs, I thought felt a lot more directly connected to that idea in the book, where in the movie she like squeezes the glass and it shatters.
Yes.
In the book, she has this memory of, in order to view the eclipse, her dad takes these like panes of glass that he cut out of a window and like holds them over a fire to like make them cloudy. And then he gives her like oven mitts to like hold them with because the edge is unfinished. And he's like, oh, I don't want you to cut yourself. And I just thought the movie's memory was better.
Yeah. Especially because, well, we move forward a little bit where they just have solar eclipse glasses or whatever to look at it with. Because that might be a thing you could do. Like basically getting it so soot covered, I would imagine that it basically gets like black to the point where you can kind of look through it. But obviously, once we hit a period where we were mass producing solar eclipse glasses, I don't know. I mean, even in the 60s, I think they probably would have been. But by the 90s, we were definitely or late 80s, we were mass producing solar eclipse glasses, so we didn't have to have this weird thing.
Yeah.
So I think that makes sense.
I really liked the headlights on the car as she's like driving away, fading out as she lost consciousness. I thought that was really cool.
Yes, so I love that. I had this as a note that as a thing that the movie does several times that I absolutely love.
I think that was the only time that I like consciously picked up on it.
I noticed it at least twice. The car driving with the headlights being one of them. The other one is that I think the scene with the glass breaking when after she breaks the glass in her hand, she leaves. Her dad takes her to the bathroom and she walks out of the kitchen. And as she's looking back, the light over the kitchen table dims, but you can still see.
Yeah.
So that's a motif the movie uses several times. That instead of like a scene fading to black, the actual practical lights in the scene fade down to being off.
Yeah.
Leaving like minimal ambient light from other like outside sources. Like you said, the car headlights do it at one point. There's a scene with the dining room. I think there's at least one more. Super creepy and cool. I've never seen that in a movie before, but I was immediately just like obsessed with it and thought it was super cool. And it also is a really good way. We talked about earlier, like with the sun being, it's a motif that matches the sun, the eclipse.
Yeah, and like the weird
light,
fading light.
Weird fading light. I just so clever and so cool. And I was like, I gotta remember that. I'm gonna use that at some point. That is too cool.
My last note here is kind of an overall note, but the movie does make the story, especially the Joubert part, cuts it mercifully short.
Yeah.
I did enjoy this book. I want to stress that. But do you know how much I wanted to cry when she got out of the house and there were still 70 pages left in the book?
Yeah.
This book could have been like 25 to 30% shorter and been just as, if not more effective, in my opinion.
Fair. Very fair. All right, let's go ahead and talk about a few things that the movie nailed.
As I expected, practically perfect in every way.
The specific line, what is a woman anyway? A life support system for a cunt.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole bit that Gerald says it, hallucination Gerald says it in the movie where he's talking about like darkness and what waits for you in the dark. And if they scream for help, who knows what might answer. And
Very
that is
creepy.
all like directly from the book.
Yep.
As well as the suggestion that whatever was there at night with her might have just gone under the bed,
Yeah.
which horrified me.
Yep. Very creepy. Yep.
If he had a drinking problem, it's certainly cured now. Spoken about dead Gerald.
Yeah.
Her father does look away from her as he's manipulating her when he actually says the truth.
Yeah.
And says that he did a shameful thing. He can't look at her.
Yep.
After getting out of the handcuffs, she does pass out and wakes up like face to face with Gerald's rotting corpse.
Yes.
And she does pretend to have amnesia to avoid talking about exactly what happened at the lake house.
Yeah.
Which, I'm going to be honest, doesn't feel like a great idea given your
No.
track record with trauma.
Yeah.
But
it seems like a bad idea. And also, I didn't understand that in the movie. I kind of alluded to it earlier, but she clearly does explain what, like, otherwise she would have been in trouble. Like, how could she?
So, okay.
Or maybe, yeah. Does the book go into it? Like, what?
Yeah. So this could have been a lost in adaptation.
I guess it could have actually, in retrospect, because I was like, you had to explain something.
So basically, the law firm that he worked for like helps her to keep the actual story of what happened from coming out.
Yeah, the movie says that.
Yeah, because, and maybe this is just like a time period.
So she
shift
tells them,
thing.
or
So she tells one specific person at the law firm that she like trusts, like
Okay.
his partner or whatever.
okay,
Like knows everything that actually happened, but they
Okay.
kind of help her like.
smooth it over.
Yeah, smooth it over and like make sure that none of the details are gonna leak,
Right.
et cetera, et cetera.
That makes sense. And then again, the movie does say that, but it
Yeah.
just does it so like hand wavy. I was like, well,
Yeah.
what? Okay.
Well, and because there's like concerns about like what they were doing there, which we could chalk up to like a time period thing.
Yeah.
Because now in 2017, that might have been like a salacious bit of gossip, but I don't think most people would.
And it definitely would be a thing you would tell to
Blink
the
at
cops.
it.
Like you would
Yeah.
absolutely tell the cops what
Yes.
happened. And like I understand, like, you know, they would want, like, maybe the law firm would be like, okay, we don't really want like a story coming out about like our top partner
Right.
having a heart attack during a sex romp and a whatever. So like let's just kind of gloss over the details of like what we put out in the world.
Yeah.
But like she wouldn't be so embarrassed that you wouldn't think she would be so embarrassed by it in 2017 to as like not tell the police about it. I could believe that in
Yeah.
the 60s, and I guess I could believe it now. There's people that would be, I don't know. It just was a little, I thought it was a little strange, but yeah, that makes sense.
But also then later on they talk about like her and this law partner talk about how she could be in trouble if the police think that she like wanted like did any of it on purpose to try to like make him have a heart attack to
right.
like
Yeah.
collect his life insurance.
Yeah.
Wild way to collect
see,
somebody's life insurance.
That was the detail of it from the movie that made me think she had to have told somebody what actually happened, and they had to have confirmed it, which she says in the movie.
Yeah.
Because otherwise she wouldn't have gotten the life insurance if they couldn't confirm that her story was like made sense and was true. So like obviously somebody had to know about it. And so yeah, I thought that was a little weird in the movie. Like this again, doesn't really matter. It's not that important. We can kind of just hand wave that away because who cares? Like
yeah.
how that all got wrapped up isn't really important to the story, but it was something I was kind of wondering. So it should have been a lost in adaptation. But all right, before we wrap things up, we have a few things to talk about in our odds and ends. So I understand this for the shot. It's the opening shot of the movie. We get this top-down shot of the bed of a bed. It's their bed in their home, which obviously setting us up for where most of this movie will take place. But they're packing their bags, and we see Gerald set his bag on the bed, and then the last thing he does is he puts the two pairs of handcuffs on top and zips it up.
Yeah. Very, very reverently places them.
And I was like, I understand it for the shot and like what we're setting up here for opening shot of the movie, but who puts their sex handcuffs on the very top of their packed bag?
Nah.
Nobody does that.
does
That's
that.
so weird. So weird.
Gerald is not the guy from NCIS.
It's true.
But I looked it up like 3 times because I kept second guessing myself.
He does look like that guy a little bit, and he also, but he's
not all the time, but there were certain like facial expressions that he made where I was like, is that the guy from NCIS?
This guy has also been Bruce Greenwood. He's been in tons of stuff too. Like that's the other thing. You probably did recognize him. Like he does kind of look like he looks like the guy from NCIS, but he also you probably recognize him from stuff you don't even realize. He's been in like
probably
tons of stuff.
As we've established, I'm bad at recognizing people. I was really glad that the movie answered my question about the spires on the headboard, the posters, because I was looking at screen caps from this movie and like looking at it thinking it kind of looks like she might be able to just slide them up and slide them off. But there's like a knob that they won't go past. Yeah. So glad we answered that.
Yeah. Which actually would have been a very good way if you're going to use these handcuffs to do it somewhat safely. Would be leave them wide enough on the the banister so that they can slide off the top. Because obviously he's not going to be able to do that in the moment. But if he needs to get out,
she needs to fucking Gerald, fucking guy.
Yeah, him and
Christian Grey
should start a support group. Or not a support group, but whatever.
A prison group.
Yeah. Well, Gerald's dead, so. Anyways.
A hell group.
Yeah. I really love, there's this moment in the movie where after Gerald falls off the bed and she's like panicking and like blah, blah, blah. There's this moment where she's like still kind of reckoning with whether or not he's alive or not. And then all of a sudden she sees this blood pooling, like kind of coming out. And the shot's great. Like from her perspective, we can only see like a little bit of his head and like his hands on the floor.
Yeah.
But like we can't really see most of him. But then we see this pool of blood start to form by his head. And when that happens, we get this great, it's like one of the only times we get kind of a dramatic camera move. Because the camera for a lot of this is pretty locked down and pretty stationary for the most part. But we get this great dolly push in on her as it really dawns on her that he's dead. And she starts like freaking out. And then we go from that super dramatic dolly push in to her to these like subsequent like cuts where we cut like outside the house and we hear her screaming. And then we jump a little bit further back and we hear her screaming, but it's quieter. And then we jump like across the street.
Yeah.
Looking at the house and you can't hear her anymore. You just hear like the birds and like the animals and stuff. It's just so beautifully communicating the scenario and like what's going on and how isolated it's just, God, it's haunting and it's just brilliant filmmaking. It reminds me of Carrie a little bit in the sense of like, how does a movie so good also have the ending this movie has? Carrie, it's kind of the opposite. How does a movie with an ending that good have some of the other stuff that happens in that movie? But anyways.
I have to bring up okay. So in the book, at one point the dog like starts going after Gerald's face and like tears off part of his face to eat. And the quote from this book, most of Gerald's left cheek dangled from its mouth like the scalp of a small infant. And I just want to say, what the fuck kind of metaphor is that, Steven?
Yeah, I don't understand.
What does that mean?
Yeah.
What the fuck does that mean?
I have no idea. That's very strange. I don't like it.
What?
I don't know. I really liked the attention they paid to her makeup throughout the film. Like she has a full face of makeup on at the beginning, and then as time goes on, like it starts to run as she's like crying and freaking out and like sweating and stuff, and it gets more and more kind of dilapidated. And then like the next day, if she's been crying and rolling around in bed and stuff, it's like gone, and she basically like so you get to see the progression of time and like what she's been going through as the makeup, you know, and also she's laid more and more bare the layers of facade
Yeah,
or being peeled
quote
away.
unquote artifice.
Yeah, and I'm not, I understand
Right.
problematic in its own way, but you know what I mean. Like, it is an artifice, even if it's a perfectly fine and valid artifice. It is a thing you're, in the same way clothes are. Like, if your clothes are being, you could do the same thing with clothes. It's not like it's not a judgment on makeup. It's just that it is a thing you put to disguise yourself or change yourself in some way.
I also thought they did a really good job of casting preteen Jessie.
Yes.
Like, she looks a lot like
Carla Gugino.
Carla Gugino, yeah.
I thought so.
Another thing that I want to mention, because this was the only thing that I found interesting in the entire section about Joubert, where they were like detailing his crimes, was that so he's described to look basically like he looks in the movie. Like, he's too big and like his arms are too long and he's like deathly pale white.
Yeah.
And has like all these kind of weird like.
By the way, that actor, that's Lurch.
Oh, is it?
Yes. I remember when I mentioned he was in Gerald's game, and that's the actor who plays Lurch. And I'm like 99% sure. I can double check that.
So he's described like looking like it's a pretty accurate vision of him. But in the book, when they catch him in the act of like crypt robbing, and he's like hunched over a coffin when these cops come in, and I was like, dude, I would die on the spot.
Yeah,
I would think I was seeing a fucking vampire.
It kind of looks like Nosferatu.
Yeah,
except it's called Nosferatu. yeah. Yes, Carol Struycken is the actor's name, and it is Lurch. He was also in Dr. Sleep and other stuff, but he's been in lots of movies because he's a very distinct looking guy. Yeah. They put makeup on him, but he also is already a fairly distinct looking man because he might even have the thing they were talking about. I don't know. He has some sort of growth disorder where that's why he's like 8 feet tall or something like that.
And my last note here is that maybe I'm just a softie, but in both the book and the movie, I kind of desperately wanted Jessie to adopt the dog.
Yeah, I could see that working, but also I don't know thematically how well that works.
How well it would work. I just kind of wanted it.
Yeah.
I wanted them to like forge a bond.
I think it could have worked. I think you could have made it work. I think it could have worked, but yeah, that's fair. Before we get to the final verdict, we want to remind you can do us a favor by heading over to Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Goodreads, Blue Sky. We're on there. I don't think we're posting on it, but we do have an account on there.
But we do have an account.
Yeah, and interact with us mainly on those other platforms, so you can tell us what you thought of Gerald's game. Blanking on the name of Gerald's game. We'd love to hear what you have to say about it, and we will talk about that on the next prequel episode. You can also help us out by heading over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, I don't know, wherever else you're listening to our show, YouTube. Drop us a 5-star rating, write us a nice little review, subscribe to us on YouTube if you're watching there, give us thumbs up, whatever. And finally, if you really want to support us, you can head over to patreon.com/thisfilmislit. Support us there for 5, 10, 15, whatever bucks a month. You get access to, or $15 a month, get access to bonus stuff at the $5. I didn't edit the episode, did I?
No.
Shit. I got to do that. I'll get it done. I'll do it tomorrow. I forgot about it completely. At the $5 and up level, you get access to bonus content every month. We put out a bonus episode. We just recorded last week, and that I forgot to edit, our bonus episode for November where we discussed Heathers. So if you want to hear us talk about Heathers, go check that out. Very interesting discussion about that movie. Very interesting movie. Really enjoyed talking about that one. But that episode will be out probably as you're listening to this. It's either out or it'll be out within a day. So go check that out. And if you support us at the $15 a month level, you can get priority recommendations or patron requests. And this one is a patron request from...
This is a request from Shelby.
There you go. Thank you, Shelby. I thought you were going to say no.
No.
Okay, you that sounded like you were going to say something. All right, Katie, it's time for the final verdict.
Sentence fast, verdict after. That's stupid.
I wouldn't blame anyone for preferring Gerald's Game, the movie, over Gerald's Game, the book. It's far more succinct and arguably easier to follow, doing quite possibly a much better job of connecting details and through lines from different parts of the story. Both versions have the same glaring issue. The cartoon boogeyman that turns out to have been real the entire time eating up 33 pages of book and 5 minutes of movie with a denouement that's so disconnected from the rest of the story that it's downright comical. But my final verdict doesn't come down to that. I'll be honest, I really struggled with this book. I am a CSA survivor, and I found parts of this book intensely upsetting. And I want to stress that that's okay. Nobody needs to feel bad, and that goes double for you, Shelby. It was upsetting, but I'm not upset that I read it. Some parts of Jessie's backstory, particularly how her father manipulated her and the way that he twisted and used her relationship with her mother, rang so true to my own experiences that it was incredibly jarring. I cried reading it. I don't know how Stephen King did it, but I don't think I've ever had my own experiences reflected back at me with such horrific clarity. So I didn't need the Chaubert storyline. Gerald's Game was already a horror story that explored a very precise, very much real horror. And for that reason, I have to give this one to the book.
All right, Katie, what's next?
Up next, we're gonna do something a little cozier.
Yeah, a little different.
This book is sad, but it's sad in the way that like a children's novel is sad. We're gonna talk about A Little Princess by Frances Hodgson Burnett, and we're gonna be talking about the 1995 film. Both things that I will be re-exploring from my childhood.
I realized that I had seen this movie once you mentioned that we were doing it.
Yeah.
And I looked it up, and we'll talk about obviously a lot more on the prequel episode, but I was like, oh yeah, I remember watching this movie a few times as a kid and liking it. And then I looked and saw who directed it, and I was like, oh, that's fascinating. I'm not going to spoil it here. That's a teaser. Come on back for I mean, you could just Google it, but yeah. Come on back for the prequel and we'll talk more about it. But yeah, I was like, wow, I had no idea. That's really interesting. So we will get into that in the prequel episode. Until that time, guys, gals, non-binary pals, and everybody else,
keep reading books,
keep watching movies,
and keep being awesome.